Good job.
All right, thank you, Ken. Congratulations, Jim. We do have a few pop-ups today. Larry Daly has a pop-up.
Morning, fellow Rotarians. It's a privilege to speak to you. I put on your table, there's a lot of things going on in our community right now. There's a lot of opportunities to get involved at the schools, at the cemetery. If you take a look at the flyer I put out on the table, you'll see that. I wanted to share with you for a minute. Yesterday, I went to the Northwest Rotary Club, and they had Sheriff Waters was there talking. What a good guy. He really is. I think, how many of you all love Jacksonville? Do you love Jacksonville?
Yeah.
You love Jacksonville. And when I listened to the sheriff talk, I said, man, this guy is a leader. He wants to make our city safe. There was a lady asked a question, and I just wanted to share this with you. She said, do our kids need to be scared?
Yeah, good question.
Do they need to be scared? He vehemently said, no, absolutely not. We are doing everything we can to make this city safe. He said, one person, one is too many. Yeah, and we know what I'm talking about. So, I appreciate, another thing I wanted to say is, we just said a pledge of allegiance, right? I see three colors on that flag, blue, red, and white. That's what's important. Those colors, okay? So let's get behind our leaders and let's make Jacksonville great, okay? Thank you.
That pop-up, Larry. Judy Matheny has a couple of pop-ups.
Hello. I bet you've noticed that we have the big red bus is outside, and that's the Bloodmobile. It's taken up some people's parking spaces, I understand. But please go out. If you've made an appointment, go on out and get your blood drawn, okay? Otherwise, you can go and just do a walk-in. We have had some very, very good responses here. And I want to thank Tom Schneider for setting things up, Mike for being part of the committee. And so this will be our opportunity. The Bloodmobile will be here through 2 o'clock. So you'll have some time after the meeting to do that. Should I segue into the next one? Sure. Okay. I just wanted to give you an update relative to Interact. Okay, because the last time that I spoke about it was probably about a little over 2 months ago, and we were making some inroads into a couple of clubs. We have crossed the threshold in a remarkable way relative to Riverside High School, and a lot in part to our new recruit, Alfred. And Alfred, you can stand up. In fact, you can come up here real quick if you want. Alfred has background with all of the players over at Riverside High School. Because of Dane, also, we had made a request or a application for a grant for Riverside High School through the Rotary Foundation to help them in any way. And what they needed was some equipment for their auditorium. Okay, so we kind of have had a really nice relationship there, but they haven't gone as far as to commit to an Interact club and the formation of it before the end of the school year. Interact.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alfred Villas. I taught at Riverside High School for 8 years before going back into the financial services industry. So I met with Tim Fagans, who's the principal of Riverside High School last week, and reminded him that Rotary wanted to be more active in the Riverside High School community. He was very receptive. I told him I had 2 teachers in mind to be the sponsor and co-sponsor. He told me to go talk to them. I had a 5-minute conversation with each of them. They said yes. I spoke with one of the counselors there. Within about 30 minutes, he sent me a list of 10 students. I should be getting another list from the AVID coordinator today. So we should start the club with at least 20 students. Mr. Bacon wants us to do a lunch and learn with the students and the advisors, just to get them up to speed on what Interact is and what their expectation and what our expectations are for them, and to get them ready for the leadership conference at the beginning of the school year. So a lot of inroads made there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you, Alfred. And of course, if it's Interact, we have to acknowledge PG Carroll. You guys have done such an outstanding job. We certainly appreciate it. Brief announcement, the San Marco Club is holding a cornhole tournament. When is that again?
It's this Saturday, 10 o'clock.
This Saturday, 10 o'clock.
In San Marco,
At where?
in San Marco.
In San-
There at Dallas Park.
Okay.
And, there's still teams available. It's $100 for a team. And, we're playing prize available. All the proceeds go to, Spring Hill Elementary School.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Ike. Just a quick announcement, that our board will be meeting next week after the meeting then. So that's a great way, to get a makeup, that sort of thing. And, also, right now is the last call for raffle ticket purchases before the drawing today. That being said, I'd like to turn it over to Jimmy Kelly for our family of Rotary.
Thank you so much. Let's see. Upcoming events, we have next week, Leon Braxton, the president of Community Schools. And then I can't say this enough, but everybody else will too, I'm sure, tell you, that Memorial Day week, we will not have a lunch meeting. We won't be meeting that week at all. Okay. Got Randy Thornton today. I had a joke to tell, but since y'all gave me such a crappy reception the other day.
It's because of my
Over there, before you ever got here, they were pretty damn good. Okay, birthdays. Yesterday turned the big 4-0. Carter Rosenblum. May the 17th, and we won't tell how old he is, Doug Millman. Terry Green must be under a house working on some pipes. This is May the 20th. My buddy Tim Johnson is May the 26th. Meredith Smith is May the 29th. Young Mr. William Milne is June the 1st. President Sean is June the 6th. And Mark Eldridge is June the 7th. Let's see if there's anything else. There was my joke. I told that, so everybody clap and laugh and all that good stuff. But at any rate, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Past President Jim. Right now, it says that we have a raffle going. Have we sold tickets for it, Carter? Do we know? Okay. We will forego the raffle. At that, I guess, moving forward, I'll call up Carter to introduce our guests, visiting Rotarians, and provide us with.
Thank you, Vice President Sean. Little dyslexic. It's great to be up here. We have a lot of visiting Rotarians today. We have one visiting Rotarian, and we have a lot of visiting guests. I would like to introduce Harvey Baxter from the Greater Gainesville Club visiting today. I guess I'll start with this side of the room and move my way over. Ed Lombard has a visiting guest today.
My pleasure to introduce Justin Keeley. He's a commercial banker with Fifth Third Bank.
I'm not sure if Ike needs to introduce his guest because he's been here a couple times already, but I'll let him do it anyway.
Alfred Aviles. I am processing his membership application, line forms to sign the application.
Alfred, we're glad to have you back. And Kim Baker, where's Kim? Another return guest too, I believe.
Thank you, Roger. Ashley Bloom with Wabi Financial Group, actually.
Okay, to get that paperwork started soon too. We've met Joe Everly's guest, but Joe, would you like to brief introduction or are we good for now? Okay. And Ed Pat Daniels, very special.
Have with me today, second time visiting Bill Hoff, retired pastor of Riverside Presbyterian Church and full-time golfer.
All right, with that, thank you to everybody who's joined us today. We're very happy to have you here. I put together a little piece of Rotary history today. If y'all will bear with me. The last time I left off, Paul Harris had accepted his role as a figurehead for Rotary. This was around the late 1920s. And he decided that, you know, it was better for him to just be the figurehead and kind of the person that goes out there for goodwill. During this time, when he started to accept this, it was when the Great Depression had started. And he understood that he could do more for Rotary by traveling and meeting in clubs on these goodwill trips. This became an important cause because of the Great Depression, and a lot of clubs were closing and membership was declining. This started in 1932 when Paul went to Denmark for a law conference. After the conference, he planned to visit to Northern Europe. Now, there's a lot that went on between all this, but I've kind of summarized it so we don't sit up here for 20 minutes listening to this. And he decided after that trip that he was going to go around Europe to advocate the extension of Rotary clubs and increase membership. He visited Berlin, Hanover, Riga, Tallinn, Helsinki, Oslo, and Stockholm during this trip. Not only did the plan work, but it also renewed his energy in Rotary and the cause that he was trying to support. When Paul returned, he made a similar trip like this through America, but then in 1934, went on another world tour. This time he took his wife Jean and fellow Rotarian Chess Perry. Paul started in England, followed by Scotland and Wales. But then he didn't stop there. He went on to South Africa, where in 7 days they visited Cape Town, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Durban, and several other cities. During this trip, Paul would plant trees of friendship to symbolize goodwill and friendship. It's also a tradition that continues today at Rotary. Upon returning from the trip, Paul went to Detroit International Convention. This all took a toll on him as he was in his late 60s at this time. And shortly thereafter, he suffered a heart attack, which put him on the sidelines for a few months. But that didn't deter him. Despite the heart attack, Paul in 1935 and Jean embarked on another trip, this time to Southeast Asia. They visited Hawaii, Japan, China, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand. The result of this trip was a surge in membership. Rotarians everywhere began to know Paul Harris as the living embodiment of Rotary, and his efforts united the clubs worldwide. If that weren't enough, in 1936, Paul and Jean went on another tour to visit countries they had not visited. During this 3-month trip, they traveled to Mexico, Panama, Colombia, Bolivia, Cuba, Peru, Chile, Brazil, and Argentina. At the end of the trip, Paul made journals to record these events. The first 2 trips he put in a journal under the name Journey to Europe and a Visit to Great Britain and South Africa. His goal was to combine these in a book called Paired Nations. Paul's Asian trip was made into a hardcover book called Paired Nations Volume 2, and he made his South American trip into Paired Nations Volume 3. Unfortunately, there is no Paired Nations Volume 1, as the 2 first journal entries were never turned into a book or document. So when Johnny Cash says, "I've been everywhere, man," that's Paul Harris. This concludes my moment in Rotary history.
Mr. President, I had one more family of Rotary.
Yes, sir.
I've been asked by a number of people to ask this question, so I might as well just get it out of the way and ask it in front of this forum. Ed Daniels, are you going back as a interim school superintendent?
Oh, and blank, no.
All right, well, there you go. Fellow Rotarians, it's indeed a pleasure to introduce our speaker today, a man certainly that needs no introduction before this group. And as you well know, oftentimes some of our best programs come from our members. As much as I would like to take credit for the idea, President Sean started discussing with Dr. Thornton, him giving a program on health-related matters, either during COVID or right after we resumed, coming back after COVID abated a little bit. Since then, additional youth-related health issues, which if you're not aware is going to be a major initiative for our incoming Rotary International President, Gordon McAnally. So that's going to be a major thrust next year. So with these additional youth health-related issues, both physical and mental, having taken center stage, we thought it would be a great opportunity to have Randy come and talk to the group. President Sean, of course, has given him carte blanche to address whichever issues he thought would be most interesting for the group. So please give him a warm welcome to Dr. Gill.
Thank you, Dane, and my gosh, thanks for having me come speak, because it's something I really am passionate about is medicine. And when they gave me the opportunity to talk medicine, it's a broad field, and both Dane and Sean said I could talk about whatever I want. So I thought I'd narrow it down and pick some of the hot areas of medicine, primarily the mental health crisis, COVID, everybody likes hearing about. Near and dear to my heart is the vaccine controversy, and if we have time, the obesity epidemic and other things that we face nowadays. Obviously, I'm a pediatrician, so the slant will be geared towards pediatrics. So bear with me, but I'll try to keep it, across all ages too. Gosh, a little bit about my background. I've been in town since 1986 when I finished residency, and I honestly grown up in Virginia, gone to college and med school up there, and had every intention of joining my pediatrician back in Virginia Beach. And it turns out the chairman of our residency program when I was at Tampa General is old friends with Dr. Jim Lanier, who many of you may remember was a longtime member of our club before he passed away about 10 years ago. And I didn't know anything about Jacksonville, but had recommended me to come meet with Dr. Lanier and his partner at the time, Steve Geiland. And I came up and fell in love with Jacksonville. I said, this is too good a job to turn down. So I came and joined back in 1986 and have never regretted it. And I have actually loved the practice of pediatrics. And I got to tell you, the changes, it's fascinating to me, just the changes that have occurred in my almost 37 years of practice. It's phenomenal to me. All the diseases that are now being cured, things that I learned about in medical school and in residency, there was no hope for. The class one is a child who's born with what's called hypoplastic left heart. Essentially, the left heart never develops, and it's a fatal disease to be born with. And now these kids are being cured. They, when I was in residency, you didn't do anything. You put them on oxygen and let them pass away gracefully. But now there's surgery, and these kids, we have 4 or 5 in our practice who are thriving. And so unbelievable. The vaccines that have come, that's going to be a whole part of this talk is the controversy that there's so many more vaccines that we have now that are curing these what were once horrific illnesses. Oh gosh, the preemie care. When I was in residency, babies that were born, remember 40 weeks is full term, 9 months is full term. But babies less than 30 weeks had all sort of problems, and less than 28 weeks, that's 3 months early, you could expect a lifelong problems. And these kids are doing quite well now. When I was in residency, if they were 26 weeks, if you're 26 weeks along and the mom was in labor, we would actually bring a scale into the delivery room. And if they were less than 500 grams, which is just about a pound, we didn't do anything. Yeah, there's just nothing you could do. And nowadays there's just amazing. Right before I came to it was just phenomenal today. It was good timing. It was a child, he came in for his 11-year-old physical, was born at 26 weeks. And this child, you'd never know he's premature. He's completely normal. She's thriving in school. His growth is right up. Brain and lung development doing fine. And this is all the technology that we have available now. So just the changes. And then day-to-day recommendations. How many of y'all, I still say it is the grace of God that my daughter is alive, because she's 31 now. When she was born 31, almost 32 years ago, the recommendation was for babies to sleep face down. The theory being, if they slept on their backs, they would spit up and aspirate, and we didn't want that. And by sleeping face down, they sleep beautifully. Sleeping on your stomach, they sleep great. But there was this dramatic risk of SIDS, crib death. And since somebody came up with the bright idea of trying babies on their back, sleeping on the back, it has cut down the risk of SIDS by over 50%. I tell you exactly when it happened, because my daughter is 31, my son born 2.5 years later. By then the recommendation was to put everybody on their back. The problem now is they startle, which is part of the good thing. It keeps them from having the risk of SIDS, but it has cut down that risk over 50% since just doing that simple thing is making safe sleep and having them on their back. Well, moving on a little bit, because I wanted to touch on some of the hot areas. Mental health is obviously, everybody hears about the mental health crisis nowadays, and it's not a new thing. This is, gosh, the 5 years, if you look at the 5 years before COVID, there was 40 to 50% increase in anxiety and depression, especially in teenagers before the pandemic. It's once the pandemic starts, we hear all this, and it makes perfect sense. There's the isolation. Kids, they're not in school, they're not around their peers. It's all that social interaction goes away. So naturally the stress blossoms. There's fear. All the, fear of the disease, think of all the changes that happen, the dramatic changes just for, parents at work, parents, and all the struggles at home. But if you want to see what fear can do, look what happened to the stock market. Right when COVID hit, that's a pure result of fear. The stock market just tanked right when all the lockdowns started. But fear, and then the tragedy. We look back and it's really sad, but 200,000 children lost either a parent or a grandparent during the pandemic. So it's really been tough, and the stress that occurred during the pandemic has naturally led to a lot of increased anxiety and depression. And there's a lot more to it. The genetics is a huge part. One of the first things we ask when we start working children up for the risk of depression, anxiety, does it run in the family? And invariably it's yes. So genetics is a huge part. Family situations, the family dynamics is a huge part. But what do you think is the arch villain? What is the arch villain of the stress and anxiety and depression of kids? Is social media. And this over the past few years, there is no doubt, there is study after study shows the relationship to social media and anxiety and depression in kids. And it's directly related to the number of hours that you spend on social media. And it's amazing to me when you read the studies of the amount of kids, some kids 7 hours a day on social media. If you look at that, there's no way they're sleeping well or getting adequate sleep. They're certainly not eating well. They're almost certainly not getting adequate exercise. And that's what we always call the heart healthy lifestyles. Eating well, sleeping well, and exercise is how we deal with stress and to help eliminate anxiety and depression. So social media is, doesn't affect all teens, but it's a ton of them. Then obviously school stress, the cyberbullying or bullying in general, and then cyberbullying, there's stress of academics, so that's out there. And the latest is this cohort of teens that now identify themselves as LGBTQ. I can't keep track of all the initials, but the amount there that identify as LGBT, before 2015 is when they started keeping track. 2015, 89% of the population of America identified themselves as heterosexual. It is now down to 75%. Back in 2015, 8% of the population identified themselves as lesbian or gay. That is now up to 15%. So it's becoming more accepted, but it's the stress that goes along with that is for real. So what are the consequences of all this anxiety and depression? It's obviously substance abuse. We're seeing that over and over. And what's the scariest is the amount of self-harm. We see kids coming in that have been cutting, kids even worse that are attempting suicide, and it's there. And there's no question, especially as a pediatrician, mental health is absolutely as important as physical health for a child's development. So that's what we're dealing with in pediatrics now. So what do we do about it? Well, the mental health access to mental health is pretty bad these days. There's just not enough good psychologists and psychiatrists to see them. The hospitals are overwhelmed. Wolfson, there's days, because I hear about it, the days where kids are backed up and stacked up in the emergency room just because there's no mental health bed available. And if they're not in the emergency room, the alternative is a less than optimal ward that's not used to taking care of kids with mental health issues. We're doing what we can. What about the schools? Ed, you need to come back and fix this. Because 50%, unfortunately, only 50% of schools in America have access to school psychologists and mental health, and those that do are overwhelmed. So it's a tough situation out there. It's not all doom and gloom. There is some good news. Telehealth has really helped in the mental health field because it gives you an easier access to psychologists, even psychiatrists. And just a shout out for Wolfson. This is great news because they had a grant from the Dolores Bar Weaver Foundation to start a 21-bed unit that's in existence now. A 21-bed unit for solely dedicated to mental health patients is already set at Wolfson. And this summer is supposed to open a new 20-bed unit. What was the old pediatric ICU? I don't know if everybody saw the new ICU tower that's been opened, the Baroe Tower. That's all the ICU patients in ICU and pediatric ICU moved over there. So the former 20-bed Wolfson ICU is now going to be also transformed into mental health. So that'll give, actually, it's a shout out for our city, is Wolfson will now have the largest mental health capacity of hospitals in the entire state. So that's the good news. What can we do? Well, pediatricians, a lot of it's falling on us. The pediatricians, we do start screening everybody once a year when they come in for the annual physicals. We're screening everybody at 12 years old and above for anxiety and depression. And we started what's called a collaborative care model. It's actually one of the first ones right here in town. It's one of the child psychiatrists, a lady named Elise Faluco, got a group of the pediatricians together, went through extra training on mental health. And they've set up this model where we can start seeing more and more and making us feel comfortable seeing more and more of the patients in coordination with the psychiatrist. They'll be on the phone, they'll see them also, and then we do most of the routine care. So it's taken some of the burden off the psychiatrists because they're overwhelmed, but it puts a lot of it back on the pediatricians. How about you guys? What can parents and grandparents do? Well, know what your kids and your grandkids are doing. Be aware. Know what they're watching. Know who they're hanging out with. Know where they are. Look for the red flags. The classic one is anger. A lot of kids don't. They may be depressed and seem solemn and depressed, but most times, the first sign of depression is anger, especially in younger kids. But one of the biggest things is if all of a sudden they're not enjoying the things they normally like doing. If you see, interests change, but if it's something your kids really like to do, your grandkids, and all of a sudden they're just not enjoying that anymore, they're staying in their rooms, that's a huge red flag. And those are ones that recommend getting checked out. And again, it's part healthy lifestyle. We all can preach it ourselves, but having your kids and your grandkids eating routinely, eating as a family, getting adequate sleep, and then exercise. And those are the simplest things for our grandparents and parents have preached for generations. We'll talk about shifting gears. One of the biggest stressors. What about COVID? And that's what I just touch on a little bit. We all thought about the first cases, but we all heard about them. Remember in January 20, or even before that, with China, and then in Wuhan, and then the first cases that came to America, and then, gosh, March rolls around. March, I'll never forget, it's Friday, March 13th, and everything just kind of shut down. And I still think it's a blessing. My daughter, for us, was able to get married. The wedding was planned for February 22nd, 2020. So we lucked out. Deanna was able to get married right before everything locked down, and even had her honeymoon. And I feel sorry because a lot of her friends were just not so fortunate that the timing as everything kind of went away. But just the changes like that. Nobody wanted to come to the doctor. Yeah, all of a sudden, boom, nobody's there. We tried to adapt to all of this. We started to shut down the waiting rooms. We started doing well visits in the morning, and then we'd do a few sick visits in the afternoon. And then it was time to clean the off scrub, be ready for the next morning. And that seemed to work well. But the biggest advent was telehealth. Telemedicine was just coming around, but then COVID hit, and boom, everybody is doing telemedicine. And that's a challenge because I tell you, it is so much easier as a physician to see a child patient, especially certain things you just can't do telemedicine. And some you can, but there's a number of rashes that I tried to see, and you're looking in and doing this. It's hard enough when they're right in front of you. And now they got this screen that the resolution is off. And I still just tell the story as I was doing one telemedicine call, and the mother's driving, and she's holding up her rash, and she's holding up her phone with the child. They see this buckled into the back seat, but she's trying to. I said, "Ma'am, do you mind pulling over? You're making me nervous." But telemedicine's helped. COVID in general, obviously we always hear about it in kids. It's definitely milder in kids, but it is not entirely benign. Good news, kids, remember, children represent 22% of the population, but only 3% of all hospitalizations for COVID were children, and only 0.2% of deaths are for children. So it's less of a problem than in the adult population, but it's not benign. There are still kids get sick, and there've been over 200,000 hospitalizations, more than 2,100 deaths of kids from COVID. But what we see is the majority, is what we always hear, the majority of those that were hospitalized or that died were unvaccinated. And so the vaccine does work at preventing the serious cases of COVID. And the problem is nowadays, very few kids are vaccinated against COVID. Hardly anybody less than 5 years old. It's approved 6 months and older. Hardly anybody less than 5 is vaccinated at all. And those above 5, very few are fully vaccinated. Because the parents are skeptical of the vaccine, which actually brings me to the next part of this talk. I wanted to just mention vaccines in general, because Dan, think about it. What if you think about the greatest over the past 100 years? What are the greatest accomplishments in mankind? The automobile, telephone, the computer. Well, in my opinion, vaccines are way up there because it's I got some data. You look at this and it's phenomenal what we used to see. Before the vaccines, these are just annual cases. Annual cases in America, 500,000 cases of measles each year, 150,000 cases of mumps, 50,000 of rubella, which is German measles, 175,000 cases a year of pertussis, which is life-threatening. That's whooping cough. 150,000 of that, 175,000 cases of diphtheria. and 16,000 cases of polio every year, which we know what that can lead to. The problem with the vaccines, they have been so effective that we don't see these illnesses. The physicians, most of these I've never seen or hardly ever seen. And now the worry is the vaccines. The parents don't see these vaccine preventable illnesses, and they don't hear about them anymore. So now all the worry is, what about the vaccines? There must be a problem there. Well, how did this controversy start? Because now it's, don't get me started, but the whole issue started in the late 90s. There was a researcher named Wakefield who made the hypothesis that the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, they were given a year, was linked to autism, which is just an awful developmental disorder. And what happened, this study that he presented, this paper he wrote, was published in Lancet, which is a British medical journal, and he gave it credence. And the problem is it got picked up by one of the nightly news, it was either Dateline or 2020 in the late 90s. And so they did a story that they made the hypothesis the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine could cause autism. And this is something we give every baby at a year old. And that's all it took. And of course, people go, I don't want that. I don't see measles anymore. That's not a problem. And so parents stopped vaccinating, especially in England. And these kids were getting older and getting they become childbearing age, never been vaccinated, never having had measles, mumps, rubella. And if they get German measles, rubella while you're pregnant, it is catastrophic to the baby. They're born deaf with brain damage. And so they started doing studies. There are more and more studies. This is the one study that suggested it. Multiple studies came out since then that showed just the opposite, that the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine did not cause autism, to the point that the Lancet, the British medical journal that published it, retracted it, said, no, this was wrong. This is bad information. So they did the right thing. They retracted it. Even the researchers with this Wakefield there was like 10 authors in the study. All but Wakefield came out publicly and said, we were wrong. These are the guys that did the study and said we're wrong. The problem is passion dies hard. If you're convinced, if you are absolutely convinced that the vaccines are dangerous, I'm not going to be able to convince you. All I can do is give you the science, and that's how I'm trained. And I can tell you this is the evidence, but if you're convinced, that's going to be a hard sell. And there's people who are pretty vocal. Jenny McCarthy is one of the huge anti-vaccine spokespeople. And you ask her she has a child who's autistic, and you ask her to cite her evidence, says, I don't need to. My evidence is home. His name is Evan. I can't argue that. I mean, what do you do except give you the data? Well, most people are realizing maybe the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, that's not the cause of autism. So there's a big shift. Remember, there was a worry about mercury back about 15, 20 years ago. It's the mercury in the vaccine, which is what we use it's a preservative, and it allows us to use multi-dose vials. So we can, draw up, and it's a lot more cost effective to use one vial than 10 separate syringes. And so everybody said it's the mercury in there. That's the cause. Well, the type of mercury is ethyl mercury, not the mercury that's in tuna fish that's in the environment is methyl mercury, and that can cause problems. But ethyl mercury is so infinitesimally small, but it became a PR nightmare. So that has all been the past 15 to 20 years. There's no mercury in the vaccines. It's just driven up the cost, and it has not brought autism down at all. If anything, the risk has gone up because we're finding it's genetic. The mercury, I love the story. You look at mercury, there's actually, because everybody breastfeeds, you know how important breastfeeding is. They found out there's more mercury in breast milk than there is in the vaccines back when it was. We live on the earth. There's mercury in the earth's crust. We're going to have mercury in our bodies, but it is not the mercury. We're finding autism. The latest research is it's genetic. Nobody's 100% sure, but it looks like it is genetic. I love the story. Dr. Lanier, when I first joined the practice, we were talking about this before COVID, but we're all, this vaccine controversy coming out. I talked to Dr. Lanier. He was talking because he started practice in 1948, and this is before the polio vaccine. And he'd actually grown up in Jacksonville, and he was telling me, Randy, during the days of polio outbreaks, you could not go to the movie theaters. In Jacksonville, you don't go to the movie theaters, you don't go to the swimming pool, you can't congregate. I don't mean that'll never happen nowadays. March 2020, can't go to the movies, can't go to, so it shows you how things can come around, and the vaccines really are effective. And in my opinion, they get a bad name. Smallpox, certain things are almost eradicated. Smallpox, we no longer see. Many things we hardly ever see. But polio, look at Rotary. How close are we to eradicating polio from the face of the earth? So I'll go a few more minutes, then anybody has questions. I wanted to touch a little bit on one of the hard areas of my job is child abuse. We see it, and it's tough on physicians because essentially in the old days, the stories that we would hear for some of these injuries and burns, the stories that we hear, people were accepting as plausible because nobody in the old days wanted to believe that a parent or caretaker was capable of abusing a child. Now we're finding it happens, and it's actually become the law for pediatricians. It is my requirement is if anything is suspicious, I'm required by law to report it, and it gets me in hot water with some parents. Man, when you get reported, it goes to DCF, and they have to get investigated that day. But if it's suspicious, it is my requirement. I have to report it, and it's usually when the story doesn't quite fit the physical exam. The question a lot of parents have is, well, what about spanking, corporal punishment? Does that constitute child abuse? And that's a tough thing, because as a pediatrician, there's better ways to discipline than spanking. We find, and my personal feeling is, I think a lot of parents are going to discipline their children the way they were raised themselves. If they spank, they're probably going to spank their own children. But where does it become abuse? If you leave a mark on a child that lasts longer than an hour, that's by definition child abuse. And the parents go, well, I didn't intend to do that. Well, you didn't intend to, but you did. So that's the law. If you leave a mark that lasts longer than an hour, that's child abuse. And my recommendation, if you're going to spank, use your hand, don't use an object, and never on the face, never on the abdomen. But be aware, you're going to get an immediate response from that child, but in the long term, it just doesn't work very well as a discipline technique. One thing we can do, if we do witness or see anything, and it's not just physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect. If we, in the population, if we see it or think it, report it. There's a child abuse hotline. The number is easy. It's 1-800-96-ABUSE. It's easy to find. It's a child abuse hotline, and it goes right to DCF. And they're required within that day to investigate. And many are unfounded, and many times it's sad. It's parents who divorce and one trying to get each other, and that we work through. But if you suspect it, or if you're worried about your neighbors or kids in the neighborhood, report it. One last thing I wanted to touch on is, after a good meal, is obesity. That's the latest. That's the latest epidemic, and we're seeing it. It's 30% of adults, 20% of kids. The highest, obviously, Hispanic and African American have the bigger risk, but it's the consequences that we're seeing: high blood pressure, strokes, heart disease, joint problems, asthma. What is amazing to me is diabetes. Remember, diabetes, what we think as a pediatrician, it was always type 1 diabetes. And that's where antibodies attack the pancreas and you lose the ability to make insulin. Type 2 diabetes is what we think about from being overweight. And when I was in medical school, even in residency, it was always adult onset diabetes. The name was adult onset diabetes. We never saw it in kids. Now we're seeing it. Well, what happens is the body makes so much, your body is unable to use insulin. Pancreas goes crazy, you just can't utilize it. There's physiology, but it's solely related to being overweight. There's usually family history, and it's obesity that goes right along there. But I've seen it in an 8-year-old in the office. It's sad. I had last week, unbelievably, a 16-year-old who weighs 400 pounds, and so that's That's what we're seeing nowadays. And it's too many calories in and not enough calories out. So it's there and we got to work on it. It comes back. The start is heart healthy lifestyle. You can do this over and over again. I say healthy heart. It's also healthy brain, healthy mood, but eating properly, getting adequate sleep and exercise, and all three equally important. Our problem is when I come in the room and both parents are heavily, are way overweight, it's going to be a tough sell. And what's going on in kids now, they're actually, and it's falling on the pediatricians, start using more medicines to help, and even surgery, the gastric bypass. So that's coming, but it's sad, but it's, it's tough when you go into McDonald's and you supersize it for 89 cents more, and or a Big Gulp, and it's just not the way to be. Well, the good news, what about the future of medicine? I end here. Just a couple of things. It's exciting to me because so much has changed since I started practice, but the future is phenomenal. The new technology that's coming now is, the diseases that we're seeing now will be cured in the near future. The vaccines, there's so many vaccines now, but the newest ones, the ones that are attacking cancer. There's one that's available now that's optional. Is one, I don't know if you ever heard the Gardasil. It prevents genital warts, a sexually transmitted disease, but it prevents a thing called HPV, human papillomavirus, which is a sexually transmitted disease, but it's linked to cancer, and girls' cancer, the cervix, and boys, some male cancers and some head and neck cancers. But it's preventable. It prevents that virus from getting started, but it's an optional vaccine, and parents are skeptical. So that's been a hard sell, but that's available. There's an RSV. Everybody heard of RSV, respiratory syncytial virus? Is a nasty, nasty virus that's horrific on babies or for the elderly. But there's a vaccine that's in the horizon right now. It's going to first be released for pregnant women. That's how it should help prevent there. To me, the neatest thing is stem cell. What's coming up with stem cell treatment is it's in its infancy now, but the prediction is in 20 years. In 20 years, every baby when they're born, they'll have their DNA sequenced. And what is the outcome of that? Is there'll be no need for organ donors. They'll take these stem cells and you'll grow the organ in a lab and be able to transplant right there. So that's what's coming. So it's an exciting time, but in the meantime, please stay healthy, wash your hands, heart healthy lifestyle, and I appreciate it. That's it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring the mic around. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll come over to you.
So, Doc, do you have thanks for your presentation. It was awesome. Do you have a theory with autism why we're seeing a 10, 20, 30 times increase, like compared to when we were growing up to now, the environment, things we're ingesting? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's no question we're recognizing more. The incidence is there. And I think the biggest thing what's accepted now is we're looking for it. We're screening for it at 18 months and 2 years old. We screen every toddler for autism. So we're learning to recognize it more. And that's the latest there. And there's so many things being kicked around what could cause it, but now I think genetics is still the prevailing cause. But it's because I think we're looking for it.
Doctor, again, great presentation. And thank you for covering those topics. You talked a lot about the mental health crisis that we're all experiencing right now. How has the number of available counselors and also possibly insurance, has that grown, and is that now being recognized and supported on a more regular basis now?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just the opposite. Is the psychologists, the reimbursement for psychologists and psychiatrists is pretty poor. Hopefully that'll come up, but it's still what they're getting paid is awful, and the time it takes is just tough. So the availability, there's just not that many psychologists and psychiatrists out there. Remember, psychologists do the therapy, psychiatrists are physicians. They can prescribe, but it's just not enough of them, and the reimbursement is a big part of it.
Question over here.
My name is Ashley. We spoke earlier. Thank you for taking the time to introduce yourself. Where do you think the healthcare industry is going as a whole?
Medicine.
Oh, gosh. Well, I can tell you where I hope it's going is, one of the biggest things is I hope it's going to allow physicians to make our own decisions. Right now, where I see it's going is scary to me is corporate medicine is, there are practices being bought up and we're being told what to do. It's being told how many patients we have to see, and that's hard. And the other thing, what I see is worrying me is the outcrop because they're money makers or minute clinics and care spots and that are getting comes in and you can just walk in and be seen, but they're not seeing the kid as a whole. They're seeing them for a short period of time and then all of a sudden any issues are left to us. But so those are the worries. But as a whole, I can't think of anything better. I wish everybody would go into medicine because it's still the nicest profession. You get to help people, especially in pediatrics. You get to see them get well. But that's a hard question. There's where I see it going. I can hope it's going in the right direction. We can see those, and we can see people want to go into medicine.
Can you comment about the relationship between physicians and the insurance companies, Florida Blue, for example?
Oh gosh, I can tell you, from my personal experience, it gets hard because certain ones they're trying to dictate what we can do, and that's hard. I can give advice, but then I have to get all this approved, which never happened years ago. But I can understand that some of these procedures we need are expensive, but that's the hardest thing is them telling me what I can and can't do, and then if they're going to reimburse, and then what they're going to pay for. And certain ones, it's frustrating when I have to pay this much for the vaccine, and the insurance company said we're only going to pay this, doesn't cover the cost. So that's where it's getting frustrating. Is it's financial the reimbursement.
It seems like they're doing the administrative side.
Well, that's not just the insurance companies, it's the hospitals, it's companies buying us up. And you almost have to compete. I don't know how solo practitioners do it nowadays. It's a frustrating time that we didn't see years ago. So that's the hard part of this job is dealing with administration and bureaucracy. But my wife calls me a big kid. So I like it's getting to see kids and doing the part of medicine I can't see doing anything else. So I deal with it, but I don't like it.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Thornton. It was excellent.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. I know on behalf of my family, Dr. Thornton and his team over at Jacksonville Pediatrics have taken just tremendous care.
Yes.
My daughter Claire and all that. Really great. Couple of reminders before we go. I'd like to thank all of our guests and visiting Rotarians that joined us today. Hopefully you're able to make it back and join us again soon in the future. Don't forget the Bloodmobile is outside. Thanks again to Tom Schneider and Jimmy McPhee for working on that and getting those guys out there. Please join us next Wednesday. As Jimmy said, our speaker will be Leon Baxton. And that being said, I will turn it over to Allie Loaiza to lead us in the 4-way cup.
Ready? Is it true? Is it fair? Oh, please join me and say the 4-way test. Is it truth? Oh. First, is it true? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Hey.
All right, President Sean's quote of the day comes to us from Herbert Hoover. And he says, if we could have but one generation of properly born, trained, educated, and healthy children, 1,000 other problems of government would vanish. How appropriate, please. All right, fellow Rotarians, that being said, have a great week. Let's go make a difference. in the world.